Coming up next on This Week in Computer Hardware, both AMD and NVIDIA released new GPUs this week. See which one comes out on top. OCZ drops a new SSD line on us, and the PlayStation 4 gets torn down. It's all coming up next on Twitch.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for Twitch is provided by CacheFly at CACHEFLY.com.
This is Twitch, This Week in Computer Hardware, episode 242, recorded on November 7th, 2013. Kepler crashes into Hawaii. This episode of This Week in Computer Hardware is brought to you by iFixit. You can fix it, and iFixit makes it easy, with step-by-step repair guides, high-quality replacement parts, and all the tools you'll need. For $10 off your purchase of $50 or more, go to ifixit.com/twit and enter the code TWITCH at checkout. And by IT Pro TV. Are you looking to upgrade your IT skills or prepare for certification? IT Pro TV offers engaging and informative tutorials streamed to your Roku, computer, or mobile device. For 50% off the lifetime of your account, go to itpro.tv/twitch and use the code TWITCH50. Welcome to Twitch, This Week in Computer Hardware. I am at the host table today. Patrick Norton is off. I don't know. He's coming back from looking at fancy cars and technology involved in them. But joining me in his place is Robert Heron. How are you doing today, Robert?
I'm doing great. Thank you, Ryan. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for filling in. It has been an interesting, I would say, 60 days for like PC hardware enthusiasts, especially if you are a graphics card fan. So we were talking a little bit before the show, and you're kind of familiar with what NVIDIA has done recently, but maybe a little bit less familiar with what AMD has done with their, they kind of released this whole new set of cards through the R9 and R7 series. And what was interesting about this GPU, codename Hawaii, the actual chip itself, is that it was pretty hot. It got up to 95 C, and that was by design. Like they were permitting it to get up to 95 Celsius. And but what we saw were some like variable clock speeds as well, much more variable than we saw even with NVIDIA's GPU boost technology. Actually, Burke, that story is going to be third now. That's the NVIDIA story you're looking at. We're looking at the R9 290X Hawaii configurable GPU story here. But what's interesting about what AMD did with this iteration is they were trying to do something cool where if the GPU has any thermal headroom, you allow the clocks to boost up to that, to increase, to get better performance. But the kind of unfortunate part for them is they started advertising clock speeds as up to 1,000 megahertz instead of what the base clock was and what you might be able to get out of those graphics cards. So there was a lot of confusion at the beginning. There was some, resentment over the fact that, hey, this graphics card, it says it's 1,000 megahertz part. It's a gigahertz GPU. But as you saw in that graph that he just showed, we're only getting 850 megahertz, maybe as much as 899, but as low as 821 average clock rates in various games. So that raised the question about why is it doing this? What can you do to prevent it? What AMD's stance really was. And they kind of spun it as, hey, this is a configurable GPU. If you're okay with a loud fan, you can have a loud fan and it will run at higher clocks. If you want it to be a little bit quieter, if you're more concerned about sound levels, which is something that you probably in particular are, Robert, with the background you have, or unless you use headphones, which could change that.
No, I hardly ever do actually wear headphones. And sometimes when I'm gaming, or it depends if the room's noisy, but generally not. I'm curious though, the 95 degrees Celsius, they're saying sustained. So I'm assuming that has a little bit of headroom to it. And that just sounds really, really warm. Has anybody actually tried to just leave it running at that speed, at that temperature for a sustained period?
I've had them looping for probably 2 hours at one point. And the thing about what's interesting about this, 95C is really, really hot. But even NVIDIA has rated their GPUs at being able to run at up to 105C. But they are much more, they're a little bit more restricted on, or they play it more safe with the Kepler GPUs. They kind of are looking in the 80 to 83 degrees Celsius is kind of like optimal operating temperature. Basically, what happened is this GPU that AMD made. You know, what kind of happens is you make this piece of silicon, you send it off to the fab, and you get it back, and you don't know exactly what you're going to get. You've run all these simulations, but you're not really sure 100% what you're going to get back. And sometimes what you get back is like, this isn't running as fast as we wanted it. It's not getting to the clock speeds we wanted it to get at the voltages we wanted it to get at. So, you know, I think it's safe to say that kind of as a necessity to compete with NVIDIA on the high end, they had to kind of release that thermal threshold a little bit and run at 95C.
Does this make it more difficult then to do benchmarking in terms of how is the default driver setup? Is it optimized for saying, you know what, we're going to hit 95C as quickly as possible and make sure we're pumping out the maximum number of frames? Or is there, or are you then forced to go back and look at everything within the driver setup to make sure that you're trying to get a consistent performance result out of it?
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's a great point, because what happened is, and this story kind of points out, the driver tries to get you as much performance as possible right away. So it's not trying to like slowly build up to 95. It'll get up to 95 as fast as it can get up to 95. But what this means is, if you test a cold GPU, which I would consider, you know, it sits at like 40C at your desktop, if I quickly start up Crysis 3 and load into a map and do an immediate benchmark run of 60 to 80 seconds, right? Versus you start up Crysis, you play it for 10 minutes, and then you run the benchmark. There's actually a pretty sizable difference, or there can be a pretty sizable difference in those performance levels, because while the GPU is slowly creeping its way up to 95C, those clock speeds are going to be close to the 1,000 megahertz, 1 gigahertz level on that card. But
so at least this isn't similar to what Samsung was recently accused of in terms of optimizing for specific applications. This is just simply taking what's possible with the core temperatures that are sustainable and getting you there as soon as possible. But it sounds like you're suddenly then, it's like, hey, if I can keep the room a little cooler, that's going to really affect my benchmark testing. So you have to just be aware of that going forward.
I have seen reports of people that if you go from 78 degrees in your room to 74 degrees in your room, that it can make like 50 to 100 megahertz clock speed differences on these cards, which is a lot. And it's not something that people have really had to think about before. People have been more conservative in those, you know, those metrics and in how they even scale, right? So NVIDIA's clocks do vary on Kepler with GPU boost, but they vary fairly mildly, especially compared to what AMD was showing with these clocks. So if you look through this article, you'll see a bunch of tests where we ran, okay, what happens if you run the maximum fan speed at 20 or 30 or 40 or 50 or 60% fan speeds? And you can see actually that graph right there, Burke, if you bring that back up, that shows your clock speeds at a hot GPU run with a warm GPU. And you'll see there's two at the top, which are indicating, you know, the fan is cooling it enough to keep it at its top speed. There's the yellow one in the middle where it's kind of slowly coming down, and then you can see that it's kind of leveling out. And you've got the ones at the bottom, which are worst case scenario, you're in a very hot room, or your fan speed is restricted to a lower setting, which is what I did there. So the yellow line is actually the default configuration for the 290X, the Radeon R9 290X. And that caused some concern, right? So instead of running at 1,000 megahertz, you're actually running at like 850, which is 15% lower than what some people might have expected. And with clock speed and GPUs, that's almost a one-to-one ratio affecting your performance, right? So it just meant we had to be more careful with performance evaluation, like how we tested, making sure that we were warming up the GPUs now. To make,
so in that case, are you making it
state.
kind of a bottom line with the AMD comparison to say, hey, we are testing this in terms of the worst case scenario in terms of the thermals, not in the best case, and making that comparison instead to the competition out there? And
I would consider it not worst case scenario, but realistic scenario, because nobody games for 80 seconds, right? You're gaming for 10 minutes at the minimum, hopefully, and up to a couple of hours, right? So you want to know what that GPU is going to perform like in the middle of that first hour, right? And that's kind of the performance that you should expect.
Yeah, and for me personally, it's also how quiet can a system be overall. I've slowly over the years put fewer and fewer fans within my new PC builds, and I've found that I definitely prefer quieter graphics cards to the louder graphics cards. Going all the way back to, I think it was the the 5800 or the 6800 from NVIDIA back in the day, the one that was so comically loud that
Yeah,
they even
50.
made jokes about it internally. And
Yeah.
I think I finally got rid of that card. I kept it just because it was so freakishly loud. But
The
that's
I think
not
that was
something
the
I'm looking forward to. But
5800 Ultra.
game-wise, how did you like it as far as it, throwing out the frame rates for some of the best games out there right now?
So the new card that launched this week is actually the Radeon R9 290, which was like the little brother to the 290X. And it's kind of interesting because it's almost the same GPU. It's got 256 less cores, but it's got, I think, 2,500 cores. So that gives you're talking about 10% fewer cores, but it actually runs at more consistently high clock speeds because AMD kind of ramped up the fan speed there. And it has a $399 price tag, which is $150 lower than the R9 290X. So
Oh, nice.
it was an interesting product release because it's so close in performance to the 290X that it kind of undercuts the flagship card from AMD. Like the conclusion of this to the review is more or less, unless you just have a lot of money and you always want to make sure you have like that last 2 or 3 or 4% performance, you should not buy the 290X ever, because for $150 less, you can get a very similar level of performance for $399 for quite a bit less money. And it did great. Like, it performed great at 25 by 14. It performed great at 4K resolutions. It's an incredibly powerful GPU. Performance-wise, it definitely even makes the GeForce GTX 780 a little bit of a, it puts it in a tough spot because they just lowered the price on that GTX 780, and now it's been undercut again with performance per dollar metrics, right? So it's a great card for AMD.
Oh, go ahead. What about multi-display gaming, though? I recall that you had mentioned some issues with previous generations of hardware and/or driver packages, and I was just wondering if anything this time around was, if it all worked the way it should.
It's much improved. So as of August, they fixed Crossfire with they fixed Crossfire for single display. With multi-display, they have addressed Crossfire with multi-display with this release, the 290 and the 290X specifically. It's much better. It's not as good as what NVIDIA has in terms of smoothness of frame delivery, but you're actually seeing scaling with Crossfire that you weren't seeing before when running 2 of these AMD GPUs. Yeah, so you can see there that the R9 290 versus the R9 290 Crossfire SLI is still a little bit better, but the 290 is definitely scaling, whereas before you were actually seeing no scaling. You were dropping every other frame. You were getting these weird interleaving issues. They are slowly fixing that, a little bit too slowly at this point. Like, they need to go back and fix that for the 7000 series users from the last generation in order to really kind of make it, I think, acceptable for what they've been advertising for all these many months. But the 290 I came away with really liking as a graphics card. For $399, there's no direct competition from NVIDIA. There's a $329 GTX 770, and there's a $499 GTX 780. So this AMD card kind of sits right in the middle, has all this kind of breathing room on either side, and it performs almost up to the level, maybe even a little bit better than the GTX 780, while being $100 less there. So
that's a good pricing sweet spot too for me. I mean, that's to the high end, no doubt, pushing to $400 and beyond. But at least if you're looking for something that approaches what the top of the line cards are putting out right now, that price point is just about perfect. And like you said, there is no direct competition yet from the competitors, namely NVIDIA. So it'll be curious to see what they do next.
The only problem is it's loud. Like, it's actually louder than its big brother, right? So the R9 290X default fan speed is 40%, and this default fan speed is 47%, but they use the same fans, so it's going to be louder. I mean, if you look at those sound levels, you're talking about 48 dB for the 290 versus 35 for the 780, for the GTX 780. That's 13 dB difference. That's
you're going to hear that.
That's a lot. And you can see right there the 290X, which is a more expensive, higher performance card, it's actually louder than it because AMD adjusted the fan speed in such a way that the R9 290 is running at a higher RPM with the same cooler. Now, this may be addressed by retail cards in the not too distant future, where vendors come out with their own custom designs. And that's kind of one of the things that the communities are hoping, that Asus and MSI and Sapphire and those guys come out with better coolers that are quieter, and that may allow the clocks to go higher as well while lowering noise. But I'll be curious to see if they're actually able to hit the magic bullet, if you will, for fixing this kind of. It's such a weird product. You know, if you're a gamer that plays with music up really loud, or you use headphones, in terms of performance for your dollar, this is the best option. But if you care about the little things, noise, power consumption, you know, efficiency, then it's not as clear cut as it might have been had this been a GPU not running at 95 degrees Celsius, I guess.
I still like hearing that number though. That's almost boiling water.
It's pretty close.
We're getting close.
It's pretty close. It's like
Good
it's one of
deal.
those things where I've had to when we're done testing, not immediately reach down to grab the card to remove it from the test bed. You know, it gets a little bit hotter than most other graphics cards have in recent memory. So, and there was another release this week too. This one might be a little bit more interesting. This is the GTX 780 Ti. And what's interesting about this card from NVIDIA, it uses the Kepler GK110 GPU, which is its biggest GPU. I think it's 7.1 billion transistors. It is a full implementation of that, which we have not seen in a consumer graphics card before. And it's running at higher clocks than the 780 and the Titan. And it's running at a higher memory clock than the 780 and the Titan. This is actually the new fastest graphics card you can buy, fastest single GPU graphics card you can buy. You know, when the R9 290X came out, AMD took that title away from them, and they didn't have that title for very long because NVIDIA released this card. It's much more expensive. It's $699, but it is more efficient than the competition, right? It's only running at 83 degrees Celsius. Its fan speed, its sound levels are a little bit lower, not as much as other NVIDIA cards. Its power consumption is a little bit lower, but not as much as previous NVIDIA cards. But it performs 15% better than the 290X. So we're getting into that area of those flagship cards where you're not usually selling a whole bunch of them. They're more for like brand recognition. And well, if the 780 Ti is the best card, and I can't afford it, I might as well just buy the 780. Right, you get into that kind of halo product marketing scheme, and it's a great card. People who bought GTX Titans are probably upset because those cards were and still are $999, and this is definitely faster than that.
And you have similar functionality between both the Titan and the 780.
The only differences are the Titan has 6 gigs of frame buffer, and the 780 Ti has 3 gigs. It sounds like a lot, but in reality, 3 gigs is probably more than enough for current games. The only kind of maybe problem might be 4K gaming.
Right.
But I still think 780 Ti is doing fine. The other big difference is the Titan has full implementation of double precision compute. So it's more used for GPU compute. People who, I think there's been a market for these Titan cards for people that didn't want to buy like $4,000 Tesla cards and instead found that, hey, this Titan is only $1,000 and it has the same implementation. I think it will still be used for that, and that's why NVIDIA didn't want to drop the price anymore on it. The 780 Ti is a great card. It's not a slam dunk winner. Like it's faster than 290X, but you're gonna have to pay for that performance. $699. Not a whole lot of people buying those cards, but they did kind of promised that they would have the fastest GPU again, and there you go. Now they have it. These battles are great for consumers. Let's make sure we're clear about that, right? You know, even if you're a big fan of NVIDIA, you still want AMD to put out good parts because that forces price drops, that forces innovation, that forces progression in the market. And the same thing for the other way around. If you're not a fan of NVIDIA or AMD, you want NVIDIA to put out good parts. So I want to think that the graphics card market is kind of, the dust has settled for several months. We'll see if that turns out to be the case. But I feel like with Patrick and I, we've talked about like a new GPU every week. And this week we talked about 2. So
there's not a 790 right around the corner, correct?
I don't think so. No, there's no, somebody asked me about that earlier. There's no 790 around the corner. There's no R9 300 around the corner. I think we may see a couple of little tweaks in the lower cost, like $200 and below market coming up in the next, I don't know, maybe before the end of the year, but I don't think anything super dramatic. Nothing as dramatic as we've seen in the $300 and above market recently. So,
hey, these $300 and above cards will definitely give the next gen consoles a run for their money in terms of graphics quality, for sure. In terms,
yeah,
PC gaming is where it's always been the best in terms of high resolution support and high quality textures and things like that.
You get things like surround. You get things like 4K monitors. You get I don't know if did you talk about or see any of the G-Sync monitor technology that NVIDIA introduced a couple weeks ago?
No, what is that? I missed it.
So real quick, G-Sync is it takes, so you of all people know about refresh rates versus frame rates in games, right? And so the reason why you get visual tearing on a screen when you don't have VSync enabled is because the frame rate doesn't match the refresh rate. Kind of makes sense. And when you enable VSync, the issue has always been if you drop below 60 frames per second, all of a sudden you have to render at 30 frames per second because that's the next iteration. Well, NVIDIA kind of worked with some panel developers and realized that with LCDs, there's no reason to have fixed refresh rates. There's no electron gun that needs to recycle back up to the top of the display anymore. So now they have worked out, NVIDIA built its own FPGA that's a logic controller for monitors that will allow the display to refresh at a variable refresh rate, and they communicate with the GPU so that it's always the same. So if your game is outputting at 55 frames per second, the panel refreshes at 55 hertz. If your game is outputting at 80 frames per second, the panel will refresh at 80 hertz, up to whatever the maximum refresh rate of the panel is. But we've got 120 hertz panels, we've got 144 hertz panels from some of these gaming monitors that are obviously true refresh rates, not the kind of the doubling of things that we've seen in the TV market. So it's actually really, really, really interesting interesting technology for gaming. I think it'll have applications for like TVs. What if your panel actually refreshed at 24 hertz when you had a 24 frame per second movie playing? Would that be an advantage? I don't know.
I like that too, because some of the new 4K TVs we've seen recently will actually support things like 1080p at 120 hertz. And to be able to have a graphics card, if it's agnostic in terms of its ability to communicate with the display and then say, hey, I'm aware of what you're capable of in terms of refresh rate, and I can match my output to that in almost all cases. And that sounds like a really efficient way of doing something like VSync, or at least getting the benefits of it. So
it's not agnostic. You have to have a specific G-Sync enabled monitor. It's new hardware. But, well, we can talk about that some other time. Let's take a quick break here and thank our first sponsor. This would be iFixit. If you don't know who iFixit is, you've been missing out for quite some time. They're an amazing resource. They're probably best known for their teardowns of devices. I think that's how they got that name brand, right? Tearing down the iPads and the iPhones and all these other, cameras and whatever else they had. But it's also an online community. It has over 10,000 repair guides from everything for your smartphone, computer, your tablet, your game console, home appliances, even your bike. It's like having free online repair manuals for everything. If you've shattered your laptop screen, need to repair your game console, swap the battery on your tablet, iFixit has you covered. They can even hook you up with the parts you need to do it, and everything they sell is tested and guaranteed. And it's great because most of the time, these people are using the same tools and devices and replacement parts that they're trying to sell you, which you can't say for most of the places you buy stuff online. They also make trusted repair tools for consumer electronics, including the ProTech Toolkit, which I have. I know, Robert, you said you have one as well. It's like, it has become our favorite resource in my office. The ProTech Toolkit has 70 tools in it to assist you with mods, malfunctions, and misfortunes that come your way. I love the alliteration there. The toolkit is the gold standard for electronics work, from garage hackers to the CIA and FBI. But more importantly, their unique tools are used in service departments everywhere. We're going to look at the 54-bit driver kit. This is, it's 54 standard specialty and security bits. It has Phillips bits, Pentalobe bits that work for your iPhone and Macs, Torx and Torx security bits for consoles and controllers, Tri-Wings, which I think that's like old 8-bit Nintendo cartridge. Tri-Wing, I think was what that was. Triangle bit for McDonald's toys. The kit has pretty much everything you're going to need. I am planning a teardown of a PlayStation 4 in the coming weeks on launch day, and this will be sitting right next to me the entire time, as I have no idea what screws are going to be on the PS4 or what little things I'll have to take apart to get to the pieces of silicon inside. So it's got a swivel top precision driver, flex extension for hard to reach screws. The kit also includes like ESD safe precision tweezers, nylon spudgers, anti-static wrist straps. You got lightweight, compact, durable tool roll that lets you kind of like just pack it up real quick and take it with you on the go. You get all this for $64.95, and it's got a 1-year warranty on it. $64.95. Hobbyists and home DIY fixers also use the ProTech Toolkit for doorknobs, eyeglasses, cabinet doors, sink fixtures, all that kind of stuff. It can be used throughout the house, not just on electronics. As somebody who only wears glasses at night when I take my contacts out, finding those tiny screwdrivers for, you know, popping a lens back in or something like that is always a pain in the butt. So this definitely helps with that. Best of all, there are thousands of free iFixit guides to help you put your tools to use. The holidays are just around the corner. The ProTech Toolkit is a great gift for any geek, hobbyist, or do-it-yourselfer. If you have somebody who is into electronics, or maybe you yourself are into electronics and you do not have one of these, this is definitely on the list of holiday gift guides across the web. With iFixit, you can fix it yourself. Visit ifixit.com/twit for free step-by-step guides. iFixit also sells every part and tool you'll need. Plus, if you enter the code TWICH, TWICH, at checkout, you'll save $10 off any purchase of $50 or more. Even the ProTech Toolkit, perhaps. ifixit.com/twit. Enter the code TWICH. And we appreciate iFixit's support of This Week in Computer Hardware. And I highly recommend these devices. I have purchased a lot of stuff from iFixit over the last 2-3 years as we break things and attempt to fix them, or break things as we are trying to get into them. So
the first thing I grabbed when I destroyed my first iPhone was that toolkit, the driver kit in particular, to get the screws out and to take it apart. And I used one of their guides in order to just take a look inside and to get the thing apart to see if it was repairable or not. And their videos online made it really easy right there. Exactly. You could just figure out what device you had, and you had a direct guide that gave you some insight if you're having to take the chance of opening something up. Not only do you get the right tools for it, but you get step-by-step navigation to help you through it.
It's scary otherwise.
It can be, especially when you're talking like, you know, if you had to go buy it without a contract, some of those devices can be $700-800.
Yeah.
So it's not exactly something you want to screw around with. And it's just really nice to have the right tools to do it. And the kit's case makes it easy to keep everything together, which can be a problem with some other toolkits I've used.
You don't want to drop 54 little bits.
You try not to. And those come in, actually, they're almost like little rubber eraser style holders for each of the bits too, as you take them out in sections. So I have nothing bad to say about the kit overall. And it includes, like you said, a variety of bits that worked with just about anything I could think of, and stuff I've never even seen. So
yeah,
it was nice to have.
Gets a thumbs up from Burke too. Let's talk about a couple other news items that crossed the wire here. You were talking about this beforehand. How much power does Battlefield 4 actually want? And it would appear to be all of it. All of it. Did you look through this article? I mean, this article, TechSpot tests looks like 30 graphics cards.
It's incredible how many cards they put through the ringer with that particular game. And that's great for people who own hardware from maybe a season or two ago, because they can go back and see, is it time to upgrade or not? Or if you plan to play at maximum quality at least. And just off the bat, I'll say that some of my friends who were hardcore Battlefield 2 players who really didn't care for Battlefield 3 are loving Battlefield 4, and it's encouraging me to maybe go pick it up. I have too many unfinished games in my library, so I'm trying to avoid just purchasing games for the hell of it. But that one is getting some people interested, and there you go. There's an assortment of
I don't know how you have time for that. I do this for a living, and to look at that is like, I quit. Like, I'm out. I'm done. To go back and test that many cards is nuts.
Disk image, if you're re-imaging the machine, I doubt you're doing this on any kind of virtual system. Maybe you've got a way to apply those images over a server and networked environment, hopefully. I'm curious. I'd like to know how it is they put that many cards through the ringer, unless they have multiple systems that are just identical and they're able just to, you know.
We have two systems here that are identical, but even then, swapping cards, installing drivers, all that kind of like that takes a lot of time. It's interesting results. Even if you look at like 19 by 12, which is close enough to 19 by 10, and that's probably still the standard resolution most people that listen here are using. I mean, we're talking at ultra settings with 4x anti-aliasing and ambient occlusion enabled. A GTX 780 is only pulling 47 frames per second on this.
I bet you it looks pretty though.
I bet it looks gorgeous. I mean, the screenshot at the top of the page is kind of indicative of that, right? I mean, it's Battlefield 3 was an amazing looking game, and Battlefield 4 is even better looking. I mean, it's up there with Crysis 3 and those other titles, right? I mean, the Frostbite engine.
Isn't HBAO, though, considered one of the more high-end features to enable within a game, and there are more efficient ways of getting a very similar effect? I forget what the actual acronym is for that, but that apparently is the max quality settings you can go for. But
the graph under that keeps ambient occlusion, but removes anti-aliasing, and that jumps the performance from 47 to 73 on the GTX 780. So it's interesting. They test 1680 by 1050, 1920 by 1200, and 2560 by 1600, which I think I've always encouraged people. I think 4K is way too expensive for people to be investing in right now for the most part. But if you should be getting a 25 by 14 panel, even if you get one of those monoprice versions or any of the Korean panels they're selling on eBay for 25 by 14. Most people that see that are kind of like blown away by the difference. But when you do that, you're increasing your pixel density, you're increasing the pixel count you have to render. So you're going to need more powerful hardware, or you're going to have to turn down settings to get to it. So
that's been the only driver for me buying. I have pretty much the same PC setup I've had for about 3 years now, but just about every year I'm swapping out the graphics card. I changed monitors recently, and I went from I want to say it was a 1680 by 1050, and now it's up to 19 by 12. I had this thing for 16 by 10 monitors. Unfortunately, I just have to have that aspect ratio.
We still have. I bet we have 8 of the 2560 by 1600 panels throughout the office here that we use for various testing applications. So we're still heavily invested in 16 by 10 as well, though they're getting much harder to find for sure.
Just even talking about the game though, I just the multiplayer is where it's at with that, and being able to play with your friends. And that's something I did like about Battlefield 3, and I'll be curious to see if they have any of those like fixed missions that you can run with a group of friends, like up to 4 or 5 players or whatever.
That'd be cool.
That would be fun.
I'm sad to report I honestly haven't even installed it yet. Like I think we have 2 keys for it for the office that I already bought, but we haven't. I've been so busy with these different graphics card releases and changes and drivers and stuff. People in the comments are like, "Hey, how come you're not testing Battlefield 4 yet?" And I was like, "I haven't even installed it yet, let alone found a good place to test it." So,
well, I've seen great reviews of it online, but everyone seems to point out that the single player is forgettable, generally speaking. I'm sure it's great and it looks beautiful, but it's always about the multiplayer with those games. And anywhere from say a 20 to a 30 player server can be a lot of fun if you've never experienced that.
Yeah, we used to, after our podcast, play Battlefield for a couple of hours, but it was like after last week's podcast, I was immediately writing again. After this week's podcast, I was immediately writing again. So hopefully sometime soon I'll stop traveling. I'll be out your way 2 more times before Thanksgiving. So
holy cow.
Yeah, I know.
Oh, safe travels.
That's pretty impressive. What else we got up here? Linux support for Broadwell is looking good. Broadwell being the next architecture after Haswell. Apparently, Jeremy wrote this up. About 62 patches to the Linux kernel were released, enabling Broadwell GPU support well ahead of the processor's release schedule. That's good news. I think adding it into Linux kernel early is much more important than on the Windows side, because you can do so much after the fact with Windows. And it looks like Phoronix is reporting that more code is scheduled to arrive this week to enable other features that are unique to Broadwell. We don't really know much about Broadwell yet.
Yeah, I was going to say, Haswell we've been talking about now for 6 months straight. So I've got that firmly in my head, but Broadwell's the new one for me, and I'll be curious to see if that brings things for mobile or maybe a graphics enhancement, or I don't know.
both of those things, but it's definitely going to be Intel's direction is definitely towards mobile, right? How many it's how much performance can they get in as little wattage as possible? Not the greatest news for gamers, but you're still going to have more than enough CPU power for these games. It's the GPU power that is really flexing its muscle there. Broadwell's going to have I think that was the one that was if you go back to the beginning part of the year, middle of the year maybe, that was the part that was rumored to actually remove socketed processors from Intel's roadmap, where they would all be soldered on to the motherboard, which obviously enthusiasts like immediately erupted into that.
Yeah. I'm sure Intel loves it though, because then it pairs their motherboard technology with their CPU as well. So it's that synergy to make them even more money.
Yeah, it also pushes support of the processor onto the motherboard vendor if motherboard vendors actually want to sell these things, because you know, you don't have but then it could also lower returns, because from what I understand, most motherboard returns or RMAs, or a lot of them at least, are from people installing their processor incorrectly and bending some of those pins on the socket, which is
you
like
see that little square field of pins, or however, and it's like that is where I'm doing my most delicate work, and to make sure I haven't had too much caffeine in my system, and I'm able to just steadily place that shit perfectly, because
you gotta set it down. Not a lot of room for error.
I don't want to try straightening that out.
We often get emails on the show about people who are I bent a pin on my AMD processor, or one guy tried to he was removing the heatsink off of it, and it took the processor out with it, which has been known to happen if the thermal paste is so thick that it kind of acts as glue instead. And especially if you do it, you should always remove the heatsink after like you have just like run the processor for a while, so the thermal paste is warm, as opposed to when it gets cool, it will harden and solidify, and that can lead to some
Give it a
problems.
little twist as you take it off. Don't pull it straight up, otherwise you might just create a vacuum right there and rip. Take the CPU
and
out.
Everything comes with it. I've seen the sockets come off the boards themselves. Not in a long time, but the socket has come off. You know, ripped the solder points off of the back of the motherboard. I've seen some pretty bad stuff in my day.
Terrible.
What else happened? OCZ released a new SSD, the Vector 150. Nothing too dramatic here. This is basically a move to 19 nanometer flash, which means it's a little bit cheaper. And performance is about the same. But the thing with SSDs is performance isn't really getting better on the SATA bus at this point. We'll see PCI Express and other standards kind of help in that area. Now it's just how cheap can we get them, and how reliable can we get them? So that's really the
thing that jumped out to me in the review was the warranty for that particular OCZ product. It looked pretty good for the usage you'd get out of it, in terms of, I think it was saying something at a 5-year warranty at 50 gigabytes a day. That's pretty damn good overall, considering a lot of the drives out there have far less warranty, claims that they're, or offerings. And it seemed to perform well against a Samsung 840 EVO that I recently just purchased to replace a drive I finally had go bad in one of my systems. So it's good to see them competing as far as saturating that 6 gigabit per second bus. And it had everything else lined up in terms of, the things you expect, like trim support, the thinness of the drive too. They've got it to that 7mm design, so it'll work in more places, especially in notebook designs where you might not have the room to put it anywhere. And look at the simplicity of that too. It's just a PCB board and the case to surround it, and boom. I mean, that's how most of them are nowadays, but that's just efficiency right there. Just a few chips and the controllers to make it all hum. And the performance too. I'm staggered. I'd be curious to see. I've always had good experiences with their software packages in terms of being able to download a bootable optical disc, or create an ISO image and boot from that to update the drives offline if it's a primary drive, or the desktop software if it's not. And my new experiences with what Samsung's doing with their Magician software too, I'm finding are, I have come to depend on those software packages as much as I do the drives themselves. I expect good performance out of the SSD. It's now all the other stuff like warranty, the form factor in terms of its thinness or thickness, and the software that it's bundled with now in terms of being able to quickly diagnose a drive or boost its performance specific to my computer. Those little things really go a long way toward toward helping me along. And if it comes with a great warranty, all the better. And if the price is competitive, it has to be. So it's good to hear. Good to hear that OCZ is doing this.
And those guys could really use the help from a financial standpoint. They've had some issues recently. I'm sure people may have seen their stocks. And I know a lot of people over there. I know they've done some bad things in the past and they've had their issues, but nobody wants to lose a competitor, especially one that pushed the market forward as much as they did, right? I don't think Samsung would be as aggressive in the consumer market as they are today if it hadn't been for them seeing the success that OCZ was having initially. So
their designs, their controller chipsets paired with the memory they were using were delivering some of the best performance of any products out there. And yeah, like you said, it's like if AMD closed up shop and said, you know what, we'll maybe do CPUs on the side, but GPUs were done. Just let NVIDIA have it. That would be a major blow. And I think it would give NVIDIA pause to innovate. It's like, why push as hard as we have been if there's nobody left to conquer, so to speak. But
speaking of SSD endurance, the Tech Report has been doing a kind of an ongoing experiment that's actually really cool. They call it the SSD endurance experiment, and they have posted a 200 terabyte update. So this is their basically, they took a handful of SSDs, I think 6 of them, with various controllers, and they are writing them over and over and over and over again. So I think they're writing 20 gigs per day for 3 years. Is that what it is? Something like that. And they just cracked the 200 terabyte of writes mark. So they're doing some, let's check in on the performance levels of these cards. What does the smart data say the lifespan of the SSDs are? And so far, performance hasn't really changed much. You're talking about maybe 2% at most for some of these drives in terms of performance degradation. And actually, if you go to the next page, you'll see that one of the SSDs is faster now than it was when they had started testing. Actually, a couple of them.
That was the part that made me laugh.
And the Intel, it's like, how does that happen? Like, I don't understand that at all. That's actually the Samsung 840 Pro. Oh, you got the Evo. So the Pro was like 1 to 2% faster in all these different tests after having 200 terabytes of data written to it.
Well, it must age very, very well. That's a good sign though across the board. I mean, look at these differences though. I mean, we're talking a couple % at most either way. So even over time, at least as far as they've gone, and their first report was at about 20 terabytes of total transfer, and now we're looking at what happens after 200 terabytes roughly. And it shows there's some longevity to these products. If you're gonna be using them day in and day out, expect them to last at least 3 years, hopefully.
Yeah, good news for anybody that was super worried about SSD life, I guess. Paving the way. Asus announces Republic of Gamers Rampage 4 Black Edition motherboard. That's a lot of words for a motherboard that is going to cost you probably $600. I don't think there's a price on here.
It's the coolest looking motherboard, though. Oh,
you like the blacked out color?
Totally. Really it's so overkill, and it comes with that pod thing externally. So if I don't know what the hell I'd really want that for. It's sort of just overclocking, just a quick check, but I don't need all of that, but damn it.
It does like nice monitoring and stuff, but it is totally overkill, but it's pretty awesome. That pod thing actually, so it's got the kickstand. You can see it in that picture where you could like set it on your desk. But if your computer is a place where you can see it, it actually folds a little bit, kind of like a, I don't know, transformer or something like that. And you can slide it into a 5 1/4 inch bay and it screws in on the side. Cool. Now that screen is up front. So it's pretty neat.
That I would do. That sounds pretty slick. And yeah, I like the design. Although I can't think of is it MSI maybe I'm thinking of that does the motherboards that are covered with like steel, like diamond plate almost, diamond plate looking material that they cover most of the exposed parts of the motherboard with. And I kind of like that because I also believe
no, I think you're talking about the Asus like Tough series that has like the plastic.
It is another Asus one.
It's like the plastic shielding on the PCB covers everything except the slots and the DIMM slots and that stuff.
Because they were also doing a cool thing with the airflow through that. They were able to then direct a small fan basically to be pulling through that gap between the motherboard and that plate that's over it, or plastic plate in this case. And it would do well to help cooling all the individual components on the surface of the motherboard, in addition to the other generic hotspots you're going to have for either the supporting chipsets or what have you. But I like that design, and I like Asus motherboards personally. I think I can't think of another motherboard I've used recently in any build I've put together for my own computers or ones I build for other people. So I love this stuff. And
it's an Ivy Bridge E motherboard, so know that. And it looks like it's you can pre-order it on Newegg for $499.
That's a lot of coin.
You really need to like the motherboard. I mean,
you really do.
Right? I mean,
I was going to say,
you've really got to be invested in that platform to buy a $500 motherboard. Yeah, yeah.
I need this motherboard.
What do you know about Google's Omega? I don't know what this is. I honestly didn't even look at this. So this is cluster management software that can replace Borg software in the near future. I don't know.
I have no clue myself. I'm going to take a look though.
The topic is one that many are familiar with in science fiction biology, emergent behavior and complex systems. It seems that 10,000 servers, Omega controls are displaying even more than Borg did, with opportunistic usage of resources for tasks based on priority runtime and processing power required to complete those tasks. The behavior was not specifically programmed. It has come about thanks to some overarching rules, which has led to unexpected benefits. These are links to Google papers in the article if you wish to dig deeper. So
that sounds like an offshoot of their machine learning projects, where they have been doing everything from analyzing voices that when we all use our Android phones and say something, they record and analyze all of that in the background and go through and process it. And a couple of Android updates ago, they implemented a 20% improvement in its ability to accurately translate what you say and into real world. And that was just from simply having the machines turned loose on the data. And I think it was probably about a year ago now, they turned their tech loose on the interwebs, specifically YouTube, when they were doing, I think it was cat faces, where they were doing image recognition. It's like, find all the videos with cats in them, and it's just basic lessons for the software to get to tackle, and yet for them to learn from and then apply that to other things. And that could be what they've taken some of those lessons from and applying it to how they do, cluster management in this case in terms of their data centers. So that doesn't surprise me. There's some awfully bright people in that company, and it's fun to watch them to take what different groups are doing, and yes, the Borg, to take what different other groups might be working on and apply that cross company, and to see what other benefits can emerge from that as well.
Yeah, emergent behavior in complex systems. It worries me a little. It worries me.
It's going to happen.
I know.
That whole Terminator thing, that will happen. It's just one day we're going to piss off the robots and it's all over.
Let's take a quick break here and thank our second sponsor for this week's episode. This is our friends at IT Pro TV, which I'm going to say slowly so that I get it right each and every time. If you're a fan of Twit, you probably know a lot about technology. Chances are that you're already acting as the IT guy for your friends and family. I think we're all guilty of that. But have you ever thought about working in it professionally, in it being IT? It can be difficult to know where to start, what to study, and what certifications you need to validate your skills and get hired, though. If you're already an IT professional, you know that the world of IT is constantly changing. Vendors release new technologies and new certifications all the time, and it can be difficult to keep up. IT Pro TV is a video network dedicated exclusively to the world of information technology. Whether you're looking to jumpstart a career in IT or you're already working in the field, IT Pro TV supplements traditional learning methods in a fun and engaging way that maximizes your learning and prepares you for certification exams. They have over 100 hours of content, with 20 hours being added each week. They have a growing library with video courses in Microsoft, Cisco, and more, a lot of them actually. Courses cover topics like network security, laptop repair, VLAN, subnetting. Episode libraries are organized by exam objectives, making it easy to target areas to successfully pass those certification tests. IT Pro TV hosts, IT Pro TV hosts tell engaging stories and share experiences, which make it easier to remember the content and technologies as opposed to just reading a how-to guide, which is a nice touch. IT does not have to be boring. It can be easy and entertaining while you're learning it. Even if you're already studying with the book or enrolled in a certification or technical degree program, this is a fantastic supplement to learn at your own pace. Shows are streamed live and are also available on demand, as you would expect, worldwide to your Roku, computer, or mobile device in both HD and SD quality. One low monthly price gives you all access membership with constant updates. It's comparable to the cost of a study guide and much cheaper than going to IT bootcamp. There's no hassle, easy cancellation policies. There's also direct interaction with the host via live chat during the show and web-based Q&As specific to the topic being studied. If this approach looks and sounds familiar to you, though, there is a reason. The guys behind IT Pro TV are huge fans of Twit. They have over 10 years of experience in e-learning and were inspired by Leo's NAB talk to start IT Pro TV. They even use the same cameras, microphones, lighting, and TriCaster equipment that we use. Check out itpro.tv/Twitch and upgrade your brain. I like that. Upgrade your brain with the most popular certifications recognized by employers. There's also a free preview on the site if you want to check out some of the videos or their live stream. Subscriptions are normally $57 per month or $570 for the entire year. But we have a special offer, as we tend to do. Because they're huge fans of Twit, if you sign up between now and the end of the year using the code TWICH50, TWICH50, you'll receive 50% off your subscription for the lifetime of your account. 50%. That's only $28.50 per month or $285 per year. That's itpro.tv/Twitch and use the code TWICH50 to get 50% off. We thank IT Pro TV for their support of This Week in Computer Hardware. So we're doing pretty good. There is another story that we wanted to talk about. In particular, I thought it was interesting. You watched this exclusive teardown of the PlayStation 4. Tell me about it. Like, this is something that Wired did in conjunction with Sony, right?
Exactly. Basically, Wired had an opportunity to go over to Sony headquarters in Japan, and for I don't know, a really great demonstration. They brought in a Sony engineer who was able to bring in a boxed retail PlayStation 4. At least it appeared to be completely unopened. Calmly sat down at a table and proceeded to tear that baby apart. And I mean, opened it up, removed it from the box, gave a little preview, sort of like the unboxing, so to speak. But then immediately just set to work with, I want to say he only used a single screwdriver for the whole thing, or very few tools overall, and completely disassembled it all the way down to the very fan and chassis system. And overall, it struck me as an elegant build in terms of the overall design. Very clean looking internally. It didn't look like you'd need to keep a roadmap of how you took it apart if you do decide to take one apart. There were essentially 4 fasteners on the outside that were removed, and boom. It exposed the innards, and from that point, there were other fasteners to deal with in terms of removing things like everything from the heatsink to the optical drive and so on. And it was just a terrific demonstration overall. And it just gave you a preview, too, of what the hardware looks like up close. And if you're like me, if I owned one of those brand new, the last thing I would be doing is taking it apart. So it's fun to watch somebody. It's fun to watch somebody else do it. And it also just gave me an appreciation for the design that went into that, each component and how it's put together. And I really like the fact that the power supply is integrated. I really hate power bricks in general.
Yeah.
And then the cooling system looks effective for that single fan design. I'm hoping it's as quiet as it looks. And I'm really looking forward to seeing that thing in person. And hopefully it's is just as good as everything I can expect it to be. USB 3, I'll be curious to see if and how they'll be using that beyond just, you know, providing a port for you to charge up your controllers. But maybe there'll be some cool accessories down the road that can take advantage of that speed, in addition to the other cool things. But the video overall, it's just straight to the point. It's just a guy in a dark room taking apart that. And, the motherboard design too. A lot of design I mean, of course, these are very well engineered products, but there's just a certain elegance to it. Actually, in that last shot, the upper corner on the right-hand side is actually right there is the Wi-Fi antenna on the 2 edges, and I was kind of surprised to see that actually baked into the motherboard itself. Exactly. Right where his thumb is on the right-hand side, that corner happens to be the 2 Wi-Fi antennas. He's probably talking about that at that point in the video. The Bluetooth module is separate, and that was actually a wire that ran toward the front of the console. Provided probably, I believe it was the antenna interface up there. But overall, just taking it apart, you're like, wow, that is elegant looking and very clean and very well thought out. And you know, down the road, they'll make changes and adjustments in terms of how to make it more efficient in the future in terms of manufacturing or addressing potential performance issues once you start running, you know, 80 different programs through it, and some things will cook things differently than others. But that was just a cool video, and it was good to see that. I wish wish Microsoft had beat them to the punch in doing something like that, but there you go.
It's pretty neat. I'm looking forward to it as a learning tool to when I tear apart mine in a couple of weeks to not totally destroy it when I do so.
Nope,
So
just
we'll
watch that video. It's pretty detailed, and and the guy, the gentleman doing that, the engineer from Sony, is clearly well versed in. I wish they would have more background on who he was exactly in terms of his role within the company. That was something I was really kind of wishing. It's like, oh, this is the man responsible for the X, Y, and Z within the product development, or he was the head of development. I'm sure I could Google his name and figure it out a little bit more, but that was just cool. It was cool to see Sony put something like that out. That was a little unexpected from me. And kudos to the folks over at Wired for putting that together and putting that out there for everyone, because I enjoyed it.
We've got time for maybe a couple of questions here. We had a lot of news to talk about. Before we do that, let's remind you of how you can send in emails. Email us at twitch@twit.tv, twich@twit.tv. You can find us at Ryan Shrout on Twitter, at Patrick Norton on Twitter, and you are at Robert Heron.
Yeah, simple.
See, look,
keeping it
easy. We're easy to remember that way. So twitch@twit.tv. Send in your emails. We want to know what your questions are, what we can help you with, or if you have any comments about the discussions or debates we've had too. The first question comes from Ryan Shrout, and he wants to know, how can I make sure I can capture PS4 output on launch day?
Holy cow. Isn't that built into the console? Isn't that no? Is it not?
Well, let's say we want to capture it like to stream out over, like, while we go through the menus and all the other kind of stuff too. You know, let's say that the PlayStation 4, I think, is going to have HDCP on it, output through HDMI, and since there are no component outputs this time.
No, there isn't, is there? And I was wondering if something like the HD Fury would work, where you could, I have seen and worked with products that do capture HDMI and will ignore the HDCP. So those are not legit products, but, you know, I mean,
right.
I'm not sure how they're actually sold in the US. You're probably importing stuff.
Yeah. All right.
But wasn't that one of the whole points, though? You would think that, yeah, I guess you can capture and share within Sony's system, but if you want to capture your own content for video, you want to distribute.
You'll be able to stream out to Twitch and that, but you know, we want to capture it here so that we can, you know, put overlays on or put lower thirds on or whatever it is that we may or may not do that day. We just and show the menu systems and that kind of cool stuff that people are going to want to see on day one. You know, and it's, people had always gotten around it before by just using component output, and you know, that's analog, so it didn't have those same restrictions. So it'll be interesting to see how much people have to deal with on this. So
at Houdini7 in the chat room has the ultimate answer. The old school day of where we would lock off a camera on an LCD flat panel and just record it directly off the screen. As horrible as that is, that's the way it was done before.
Yeah,
and it's making a comeback now. So, it's a, don't laugh at Houdini7. That's actually, that might be, there might be a lot of people doing that.
That's like last ditch. Like, obviously the quality is going to be bad, and you know, you get all kind of, you know, people can walk in front of your screen and stuff now. We'll see.
The cat. No, but I don't know of a good answer to that question. I mean, for you can't, I don't know of a product you can go on Amazon and find, or Monoprice and find, that's going to do that for you. Everything's going to have to play nice with HDCP as far as the copy protection scheme of the output signal, and it's expecting it to handshake with a display device that conforms to that spec. So unless you're introducing hardware in the middle that can ignore some of those things, you're not going to get around that, as far as I can see.
Fair enough. You had a note in here about your new fun thing. You want to talk about that real quick?
Months ago, when we were at Maker Faire here in the Bay Area, there was one exhibit that just caught my attention, and I couldn't get it out of my head the whole time I was there. And it was a company called Oru, O-R-U, and they make a kayak. And it turns out the gentleman who designed this thing went through 20-some prototypes to make a foldable kayak, basically building this out of cardboard until he came up with the right design that worked. And this thing folds down into a trunk-sized package that I can take over to the marina and unpack and set up in about 5 minutes and paddle my butt out in the bay and get a little exercise and enjoy myself. And yeah, there's the assembly video real quick that I hope to master shortly. And I just got I just got word that mine has finally shipped, and I put in a down payment on this several months back, and they've been catching up on production since. But
Huh.
I'm really excited about it. It's made of the same material that if you've ever picked up one of those post office carry boxes. They're made
Yeah,
of
okay.
like a
That's what it
corrugated
looked
plastic.
like. Okay.
This is like version 3 of that plastic, where it's even stronger and more wear resistant. Yet at the same time, that ability just to fold it up and to have something I can throw in the trunk like that, and I ended up getting a paddle that breaks into 4 pieces, so you can put it inside. The life vest will go in there too, and I'm gonna grab one of the GoPro cameras that Patrick has, and I'm gonna put that right on the front of it, put my GPS tracker on, and get a little exercise in. I think I'm going to take it pretty easy. I don't think I'm going to go out in the bay quite yet, but I have some good marina areas around me and a couple of reservoir/lakes that are
I would
in
probably
good
try
need.
it. I'd probably try it in a pool first, but that's just
That, you
me.
know, I'm gonna start slow, and that's the move Pat wants to teach me right there in terms of being able to roll and come back up. And yeah, I'll work on that. I'm comfortable in the water. I figure if I'm going over, I'm getting out. But
Yeah,
then that might
I
not
think-
be the right move either. So
I think if I flipped, I'd probably freak out and jump and slide out of that thing too. Let's take.
it's just the compact design that caught my attention, and I appreciated it.
I wonder what other stuff, he could apply that design idea to at this point. Now that he knows how it works.
Hang gliders. That's what
I also try that. I also probably wouldn't try that very quickly. Let's take one email from Alex. He's asking specifically about a Battlefield 4 upgrade, so it's relevant to a discussion we had earlier. He says, I have an aging gaming rig with the specs below. It's an AMD Phenom 2 X4 quad-core 965 Black Edition processor, a Sapphire Radeon HD 5770 1 gig graphics card, Asus AM3 motherboard, a CM Storm gaming case. He's got a Samsung 1 terabyte hard drive. He's got a 500 watt power supply from OCZ, 4 gigs of Kingston. He's looking to resurrect this machine for some 1080p Battlefield 4 action. Will upgrading the RAM to 8 gigs with another 4 gig kit with Windows 8.1. Or he says he will be doing that. So we know he's going to go up to 8 gigs memory. He knows this GPU will likely need upgrading. What's my best bang for the buck for $200 to $250 US as a budget? And will the AMD 965 Black Edition overclock to 4 gigahertz give me enough horsepower to play the newer games like BF4? Or is that going to bottleneck me as much as my GPU? Interesting.
The GPU jumps out to me first in terms of what needs to be upgraded. I think it was a 5770 or 5850. I forget which one I had, but that was a generation or two ago. And that single upgrade, I think the last time around it was Far Cry 3 that got me to buy a new graphics card. So I was in that same boat of seeing a new game coming up, wanting to play it at higher quality, and then wondering what parts could I swap to get that performance level. I think the RAM will help you a little. 4 is kind of like, it's rare to see in games, at least when I look at the task manager, to see how much memory is being consumed. It's really rare I ever see lots of memory being consumed overall for most games I'm playing at least. I don't think it'll hurt going up to 8, and it probably won't cost a lot to do that, so it's probably worth just doing. I wouldn't go any higher than 8, that's for sure. But the graphics card for me jumps out, and I'm less familiar with the CPU side of things in terms of if that might be a potential bottleneck as well. But I would say definitely.
Usually CPUs are less of an issue for games. Not that they're not relevant, but they're less of an issue than the GPU. And you're right, the 5770 is what stands out. I would say for 200 to 250 bucks, your best card may be like a Radeon R9 270X, which is like $199. If you can go up, I think another $100, the R9 280X is $299. And that is a significant bump in performance for the $100. So if you're looking to stay within that budget, $200, the R9 270X is pretty good. You can get those from Asus, MSI, all kinds of different vendors. And that will help tremendously. I think the processor will probably be fine for now.
It also depends too, I imagine, on what resolution you're gaming at. Your monitor spec might be another one worth including if you ever do submit specs to somebody to try to figure out what kind of.
It's 1080p.
Oh, okay.
So, he's not going super high resolution, but as we saw in those benchmarks early, depending on how you set the settings, that's still pretty tough. Obviously, you'll have to turn it down some. I would say my recommendation would be buy that new graphics card. You can get the R9 270X for $200 and swap that out and see if you still have issues. I think it will be fine at 1080p at probably medium to high settings at that point. And if it's simple enough, right? Open up your task manager, watch your CPU utilization. If it's pegging it when you're in the game, when you come back out of it, you'll be able to tell that right away. I think just looking at the system in general, I would say the next thing you probably should buy is an SSD, because that will make the system feel so much faster. Maybe not necessarily in Battlefield 4, but in everything else. After
I 100% agree with that. There is no better upgrade, especially with the prices coming down the way they have now. You're not paying multiple dollars per gigabyte anymore, or you're getting much better values than you were, and much better performance. And if you have a motherboard that can support, the SATA speeds up to 6 gigabits now, all the better. You definitely should be considering something like that. And everything from just day-to-day use, turning the computer on to turning it off, and to the games that you choose to install on the space on the solid state drive, you will be the first person in the game if it's a loading speed contest, and that's just that the usability just improves so much with an SSD drive. It's an awesome upgrade, but again, the graphics card in that particular system's case would be the first thing I'd focus on, because like I said too, I've got a computer that's about 4 years old now, and pretty much the only thing I've changed on it over the time was, one, the graphics card upgrades, but two was adding an SSD, and I still kept my terabyte drive as my data drive for backup and storage. But man, solid state is addictive. Once you dip your toe in that pool, it's over.
You can't go back. You can't build a system without it after that, right? Every laptop I buy, it's like I buy it with like the cheapest hard drive you can get. First thing I do is open it up, rip it out, put in an SSD that I bought, and off and running. So
it's extended the life of my notebook too. Just swapping that drive out. Suddenly I'm like, you know what? I don't feel that insane urge to upgrade right now, when I've just effectively made it feel 2 or 3 times faster with a single upgrade that was easy to do. Granted, installing operating systems on notebook computers can be a little more challenging on the Windows side of things, at least, in terms of finding the right drivers and getting getting rid of all the stuff in the device manager, make sure it all is loaded properly. But once you get past that, the performance upgrade alone is just night and day, period.
Very much so. That's going to wrap us up, I think, for this episode of This Week in Computer Hardware. Robert, thank you very much for stopping by and filling in. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure, Ryan. Thank you for inviting me.
Of course. We will be back next week. Again, if you have emails, twitch@twit.tv is the email address to send those in. If you haven't subscribed to the show yet, shame on you. Go to twit.tv/Twitch, TWICH, and you can find all the back episodes, links to subscribe on iTunes or other podcatcher for audio versions, video versions. All that is included there. So we'll be back next week with another edition of This Week in Computer Hardware. Thanks, guys.